Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking the ultimate plunge into a world built entirely on appearances, on acid-wash suits, and just this visceral, unchecked rage. We are talking about Patrick Bateman, the Wall Street investment banker who moonlights as an unchecked serial killer in American Psycho.
And we are absolutely moving past the surface level horror here, because the source material makes it so clear that Bateman isn't just a villain. He's the ultimate chilling symptom of a deeply vacuous, hyper-consumerist society.
Right.
So we're going to use the text to really expose the three dark themes at the heart of this satire: the void of identity, consumption elevated to actual violence, and then the ultimate horror of societal indifference.
Okay, let's unpack this, because for you, the listener, the mission here is crucial. We're dealing with a character who's an exaggerated, almost cartoonish stereotype of the 1980s Wall Street yuppie class. He lives this life of unimaginable affluence, indulging his most violent, sadistic urges, and yet somehow he faces zero consequences within his social circles. That dynamic, the unpunished violence set against rampant corporate greed, that's the core engine of the entire critique.
And if we want to understand the engine, we have to look at the fuel. The core psychological conflict driving all of this is Bateman's fundamental identity crisis. The sources stress that he's fundamentally an empty shell.
A performance.
A performance of a human being defined purely by external factors. He exists as an idea, not a person.
That characterization is terrifying because he fully recognizes it. I mean, this isn't some subconscious issue he's grappling with. It's a self-diagnosis.
He literally spells it out. He says, and this is the quote that should absolutely ground this entire deep dive, "I have all the characteristics of a human being: flesh, blood, skin, hair, but not a single clear, identifiable emotion except for greed and disgust."
Wow. It's the ultimate admission of a soulless life. He's telling us, I am a perfect physical replica of a man, but the internal software is missing. It raises the initial terrifying question for you. What happens when the only thing left of a person is their outward appearance, a meticulously constructed mask?
Well, that vacuum is where his psychosis begins.
Exactly.
It creates this fascinating study in dark psychology. Bateman is essentially a machine designed by his environment. And when a machine that is solely dedicated to external validation finds that internal validation is completely non-existent, it attempts to create meaning through extreme transgressive action.
So the violence is a function.
The violence becomes a desperate attempt to feel something, anything that cuts through the anesthetizing layer of wealth and superficiality.
So if the void of identity is the engine, where do we first see the machine starting up? It begins, fittingly, with the meticulous performance of his existence. Let's jump right into the architecture of that mask in part one, the Mask of Sanity.
The book establishes this so early on with his intense, almost pathologically fastidious morning routine. This is where the satire really begins to bite.
Oh, it's exhaustive.
The description of this routine is, it sometimes spans multiple pages, right down to the specific product lines he uses.
And that level of detail, which often reads like a beauty blogger's checklist, it's not just literary fluff, right? It's essential to this theme of monotony and desensitization.
Absolutely.
He starts his day with 1,000 crunches, then carefully applies a cold mask, followed by this elaborate series of cleansers, toners, and moisturizers. We're talking about an anti-aging eye balm, then a deep pore cleanser, then an exfoliating mask, and finally a protective moisturizing lotion.
And the sources emphasize that this highly organized, regimented existence is not about genuine wellness or self-care. It's about total control. It's about presenting an image of perfection that is physically unassailable.
He views his body as an accessory.
The ultimate accessory, and the routine is the daily maintenance of that accessory.
He describes himself washing his face with a specific water-activated gel cleanser, then using an herbal mint facial mask. The brand's prescriptives, Clarins, Ralph Lauren, and specific designer suits, they all serve the same purpose. They're just props in the performance.
His physical body is as branded and controlled as his accessories.
Right.
And this regimentation, it sets up Bateman's life as one lived without spontaneous selfhood. He is merely performing the motions of existence, constructing an external mask that's meant to deflect any scrutiny of what lies beneath.
It's a machine-like quality.
Yes, that machine-like quality, the checklist adherence, it directly parallels the ritualistic nature of his violence later on.
Absolutely. Both routines, the morning grooming and the careful selection of victims and music to accompany the carnage, are about maintaining absolute control in a world that feels increasingly meaningless and random to him.
It's all order.
His need for order is so total that it spills over from caring for his skin to orchestrating murder.
And what reinforces that sense of meaninglessness is the persistent, grating theme of isolation and the crisis of mistaken identity. Bateman is constantly mistaken for other people.
And usually slightly more successful people, which has to just eat him alive.
It completely undermines the very mask he works so hard to create.
It's the ultimate failure of consumer culture. He spends every waking hour curating an identity through consumption only to have the world ignore it. He's called David Van Patten, Lewis Carruthers, and most famously, Paul Allen mistakes him for Marcus Halberstrom.
And if you look closely at that dynamic, it reveals the chilling truth about his entire social class. When Paul Allen mistakes Bateman for Marcus Halberstrom, and the critique is sharp. In this specific world of consumerist clones, the sources argue it isn't really important who somebody is.
Because they're all interchangeable?
They're all interchangeable cogs in the system.
And that lack of differentiation is lethal for a narcissist. His greatest fear isn't being caught for murder, it's being seen as ordinary, as one of the crowd. The fact that Paul Allen, his supposed rival, cannot even recall Bateman's name, it confirms his deepest suspicion. He is invisible.
And this constant misrecognition reinforces Bateman's own realization that there is, as he puts it, no real me, only an idea of a Patrick Bateman.
So his identity is fundamentally porous.
Right. If the world only registers surface-level details, the suit, the reservation, the job title, then the real personality, the self, must be defined by the only thing that can't be mistaken for another person, the inner destructive urge.
So if the world doesn't care who he is, then the only thing that matters is the maintenance of that self-image. And the violence is the inevitable result when that image is compromised.
Which brings us directly back to the psychological profile the sources paint. He is a textbook narcissist and a psychopath. He craves attention and admiration to the point of obsession.
He gets so upset by the slightest criticism.
The slightest bit. An argument over a business card, a slight during a lunch, or a bad reservation. He completely lacks empathy, and the only thing truly important to him is that self-image.
So when that image is challenged, when Paul Allen treats him condescendingly, calls him a loser, or mistakes him for someone else, the constructed reality shatters.
And the psychosis takes over as the only viable response to reassert his identity. He doesn't kill to hide, he kills to be.
The sources suggest that the murder of Paul Allen is a desperate, ego-driven act to correct a fundamental injustice in his fabricated reality.
Exactly. Allen had the better apartment, the slightly better status, and the audacity to forget Bateman's name. In the eyes of a psychopath obsessed with status, Allen had committed the cardinal sin of undermining Bateman's superiority.
And if part one was about the man himself, let's widen the scope to the system that created him. Moving into part two, objects and suits, we transition from the personal void to the societal void. The sources clearly establish that the real violence is intended as a metaphorical stand-in for corporate greed.
It's corporate greed as physical carnage. This is the absolute core intellectual thesis of the novel and the film's adaptation. Bateman's bloodlust, the sources argue, is as insatiable as his colleagues' thirst for profit. The casual cruelty and sadism he displays in his hidden life are key elements that mirror the corporate violence he enacts daily on Wall Street.
We have to remember what he actually does for a living, or at least what his job description is. He's an investment banker, but he never seems to actually do any banking.
No, he doesn't.
He spends all his time discussing restaurants, tailoring, and music reviews. The only things that ever concern him financially are trivial: which merger is hot, or how much money he can waste.
And the irony is that his professional life is just as performative as his beauty routine. He is making decisions on Wall Street that cause financial ruin for thousands of others, purely so he can brag about it in the boardroom.
Which is a form of violence.
It's a form of violence that is both morally reprehensible and completely legal.
It's the parallel track of destruction. His physical carnage escalates for increasingly trivial reasons: a slight, an insult, or just boredom, and that directly parallels the callous corporate mindset where human consequences are irrelevant compared to profit or status.
He moves from destroying someone's financial life to physically destroying their body without any change in emotional effect.
And this is where the Paul Allen murder serves its thematic function, right? It represents Bateman's willingness to literally get ahead by killing his colleagues.
Right. And the sheer fact that he gets away with it initially proves the deep indifference his social circle feels toward that level of violence, whether it's financial or physical. It highlights the absurdity of real-life Wall Street's immorality. They can accept the financial murder, but they are too oblivious to register the physical one.
And the blurring of lines is profound when we look at how he consumes people and brands. Sex, drugs, expensive objects, they become utterly intertwined with torture and murder.
He views people the exact same way he views a brand new suit, a coveted reservation at Dorsia, or the latest CD release. They are disposable objects, commodities to be consumed.
That consumption mindset applies to everything. His focus on brand names and meticulously listing them is a search for identity through proxy. Since he has no internal self, he defines himself entirely by what he owns, what he wears, and where he eats.
And the people around him, his girlfriends, assistants, and victims, are merely objects that either enhance his status or serve his immediate, often violent psychological needs.
When he invites a woman back to his apartment, the dialogue often transitions seamlessly from discussing her clothes and appearance to discussing the instruments he plans to use on her.
It is the commodification of intimacy taken to its ultimate hideous conclusion.
And we see a stark contrast in the sources between the movie and the book when it comes to the scale of this violence. The film, for all its brutality, it sort of confined the murders to the corporate world and his personal life. It was, about 23 people?
Something like that, yeah. But the book's Bateman is far more merciless. The original text details over 50 murders.
And those book kills, they change the meaning of the satire entirely, don't they? They move beyond the strict corporate critique into something far more nihilistic and terrifying.
They do. They prove that his sickness is not just a Wall Street problem, but a total moral breakdown.
The sources mention horrifying examples that are often excised from adaptations because of their depravity.
Oh, yes. Killing a man because of his sexuality and then murdering his dog. Or the shockingly casual murder of a young child at the zoo. These are acts of random, meaningless violence against those who hold no status in his world.
Wait, let's pause on the child at the zoo. That detail is crucial and so disturbing. If his killing is meant to be a critique of Wall Street, why kill a child who has nothing to do with finance or social status?
That is precisely the point where the satire dissolves into pure madness. In the book, he slices the neck of a young boy and watches him die. And here is where the psychological analysis gets really interesting. Bateman later expresses a fleeting regret about this specific act. Regret. A tiny flicker of it, yeah. He feels that he killed someone who had no real mistakes to pay for.
So, a murderer who kills indiscriminately suddenly feels remorse because his victim didn't deserve it by the standards of his own twisted moral code.
Exactly. This brief, contradictory flicker of regret undermines his previous self-justifying mantra that he only kills those who deserved it. It shows the sheer contradiction and uncontrolled nature of his sadism.
So the non-corporate violence makes the book's commentary less about Wall Street specifically.
And more about a complete, total moral breakdown fueled by excess and the absolute license of privilege. He stops seeking justice or status. He starts seeking only sensation.
And underlying all of this brutality is the desperate, continuous struggle for power driven by a fragile male ego.
Oh, completely. He's surrounded by competitive, power-hungry males with inflated egos, all challenging his own sense of self-worth on the most trivial grounds.
It's a completely toxic environment. We're talking about men who judge each other based on their tanning levels, the thickness of their wallets, or whether they have the proper brand of mineral water. Bateman constantly feels inadequate.
He fears that someone else has the slightly better haircut or the slightly better office.
And the sources conclude that since he can't truly stand out amidst this group of clones through conventional means, like a better reservation or a fancier apartment, because they all have those, he ultimately decides he must turn to violence to attain true power.
Violence becomes the only unique identifier left. Only through murder can he assert an individuality that is truly his own, uncopied by his equally rich and vain peers. He can finally feel superior, not because his card is wider, but because he is capable of a level of transgression they cannot even imagine.
Let's talk about that conformity and the desperation to stand out. If there is one scene that perfectly encapsulates the toxic, superficial world Bateman inhabits and the competitive nature of that fragile male ego, it has to be the famous business card scene.
It's a microcosm of the entire satire.
It is arguably the most brilliant moment of social critique in the entire source material. These men, these alleged titans of finance, sit around the table and use their business cards as weapons.
It's a way of showing off their masculinity and status. It is a high-stakes, petty war of aesthetics.
We have to detail the absurdity. Bateman pulls out his new card, which he feels is perfect, The sources describe his card as white, a delicate cream color, with the words Pierce and Pierce engraved in raised Helvetica bold. He's smug. He feels like he has won the status game for the moment.
But then his associate, Van Patten, pulls out his card, and Van Patten's card is slightly better. It's bone-colored, with lettering in antique Roman, something called Cillian rail, and Bateman describes the shame. He feels a wave of nausea and his palm sweats. His perfection has been instantly invalidated by a slightly better shade of white and a different font choice.
And it doesn't stop there. Another associate, David, then pulls out his card, which is even superior. It's pale eggshell with the subtle watermark, and the texture is perfect.
And the irony is, when they line up their cards, they are all fundamentally the same person. They have the same job, the same title, and the same underlying greed.
They're distinguished only by comically minor differences. In paper thickness, specific fonts like Cillian rail, or the exact shade of white. In the novel, they even have the same phone numbers on their cards.
Which just highlights how truly interchangeable they are in the corporate machine. The entire scene is played out with the dramatic tension of a duel, but the stakes are completely meaningless.
What's fascinating here is the sheer, chilling displacement of value. These men care more about the nuances of stock and bond terminology, or the shade of white on a card, or the texture of the paper, than they do about human life.
The dialogue is key. They are discussing these.
Evelyn is the perfect accessory for Patrick. She is attractive, wealthy, and socially acceptable. And crucially, she is so self-absorbed and oblivious that she can't even listen to Patrick when he tries to confess to murder.
Her deafness is a central pillar of the societal critique.
Absolutely. There is that famously dark moment in the book where he tries to tell her he's a murderer, and he's even drawn a gruesome picture of a dead Christie, one of his victims, on the tablecloth right next to her.
And her reaction.
She glances at it and simply says something like, "Oh, darling, that's not you," or something equally dismissive, then immediately goes back to talking about her own life or their social plans.
Her indifference confirms his isolation and his invisibility. Her self-absorption is so intense that she's literally blind to the horror sitting next to her, proving that the world he exists in prefers the mask, no matter what horrors lie underneath.
So then you contrast that profound self-obsession with Jean, his assistant.
Yes, Jean represents a form of innocence, or at least she is the only person he comes close to caring about or seeing as not completely shallow. She exists outside of that hyper-competitive circle of Wall Street excess.
She is the only person who is truly curious about his life. Not his clothes or his status, but him. Importantly, she satisfies his ego perfectly because she reveres him and doesn't undermine him.
The power dynamic is very clearly in his favor. She relies on him, she admires him, and she offers him unconditional, non-critical attention.
And that dynamic is likely why he ultimately spares her during that near-kill moment. He invites her to his apartment where he keeps his tools and evidence of his dark side. It seems like the inevitable conclusion.
But he lets her go.
He tells her, "I think if you stay, something bad will happen. I think I might hurt you." Why? Why this sudden moment of apparent humanity? Is it because Jean is good, or because killing her wouldn't offer him the same satisfaction as killing a peer?
It's the latter, I think. She is uninteresting to him as a victim because she doesn't challenge him, she doesn't fuel his status anxiety. Her death wouldn't prove his superiority to his colleagues. By sparing her, he asserts his power over his own impulse, which in itself is an even greater assertion of control.
He can choose not to destroy the one pure thing.
And in doing so, he further solidifies his own sense of mastery.
This brings us to the core issue of reality in the narrative. Part 4, No Exit. The biggest takeaway from the source material and the deepest psychological rabbit hole is that Patrick Bateman is an unreliable narrator, and the resulting ambiguity is the point.
This is a crucial distinction we have to address, as it's so often debated. Being paired with an unreliable narrator creates a world that is constantly in flux and unstable, mimicking the experience of being inside his deranged mind.
This is not a straightforward serial killer story.
Not at all. It is a profound psychological descent where reality itself is subjective.
The reality-bending moments are almost darkly comedic in their absurdity, and they truly make us question reality. We have the famous scene where he is trying to withdraw money, and the ATM reads, "Feed me a stray cat."
And that's just the start. That is often immediately followed by an escalating sequence where reality bends violently to Bateman's will. There's the chase and gunfight where Bateman has incredible aim and somehow manages to navigate the city without being seen or caught.
Followed by the complete and utter disappearance of Paul Allen's body, the subsequent cleaning crew, and the apartment itself.
And Detective Kimball, who investigates the disappearance of Alan, seems completely oblivious to the chaos and potential carnage. He seems more concerned with following protocol than finding a victim.
He only sees what Bateman wants him to see.
Exactly. And let's not forget the moment where Bateman tries to return to Paul Allen's apartment to survey the damage, only to find it completely renovated, occupied by an unsuspecting couple who claims it's been their apartment for months, with no evidence of the gruesome fate he described.
It's easy for viewers, and certainly many analysts, to jump to the conclusion that it was all a dream or a fantasy sequence, a mechanism to excuse the violence.
But director Mary Herron actively dismissed that interpretation, and the sources generally support a much more chilling reading.
If we conclude it was all a dream, we let society off the hook.
And that ruins the entire satire. The true ambiguity is far more complex and damning. The ambiguity is not intended to call Bateman's actions into question, whether he killed or not, but rather his motives and, more importantly, why society allows the possibility of these actions to go completely unaddressed.
But if the source material shows the bodies disappearing and his apartment returning to normal, doesn't that offer the reader an easy out? Doesn't the surrealism inherently suggest the unreliability of the events themselves?
Not necessarily. The source material uses the disappearing bodies and the shifting apartment as a symbol of his environment's utter superficiality. The key is that the world doesn't look too closely at anything. Whether the murders were hallucinations or reality, the true horror lies in the fact that the victims' disappearances, even the gory evidence, are instantaneously erased by a society that prioritizes surface aesthetics over truth. They are too narcissistic to notice a missing person, let alone a murder scene.
So the film's ultimate theme hinges on this horror of oblivion. Bateman reaches a point where the only thing left for him is accountability. He attempts to come clean and be held responsible.
But society is too narcissistic, too self-absorbed, to even recognize his confession as serious.
The lawyer scene.
The lawyer scene perfectly captures this oblivion. It provides the final, devastating blow to Bateman's sanity and the reader's hope for justice. Bateman confesses everything in graphic detail over the phone to his lawyer, Harold.
And what is Harold's reaction?
He's completely dismissive.
Yeah.
He laughs it off, calls it a joke, and insists that Bateman is being ridiculous. Worse, Harold insists that he had lunch with Paul Allen days ago in London.
Which, for Bateman, is the ultimate slap in the face. His one attempt to assert his reality, his monstrous reality, is instantly denied.
And the final damning quote that seals the entire thematic message is Bateman's internal monologue. This confession has meant nothing.
Wow.
The societal critique synthesized here is just devastating. The real horror is not the killer, but the society that refuses to acknowledge him. His friends and colleagues are described as being as unreliable and guilty as he is.
Not guilty of murder, but guilty of such profound, callous self-absorption that they are literally incapable of entertaining the possibility of serious, non-corporate violence.
They can't see the horror because they only see the suit. They can only process the superficial. To accept Bateman as a killer would be to admit that their own perfect, sanitized world is built on rot, and they are too invested in that world to allow that self-reflection.
The book argues that the progression and deterioration of his mind, that's the real story.
Watching a human soul wither and die from the poison of excess, limitless privilege and lack of boundaries and zero accountability, that's the story. The murders are simply the external symptom of an internal and societal disease.
And the fact that his society creates him and then ignores his pleas for accountability makes them equally complicit in his moral death.
The final shot of the film is essentially a no-exit scenario, trapping Bateman forever in a self-perpetuating loop of violence and anonymity. The world he kills to escape is the same world that makes his killing meaningless.
He finds no catharsis, no consequence.
And therefore no release. He is doomed to forever be Patrick Bateman, the man with the perfect mask and the empty interior, serving a system that sees him as an interchangeable commodity.
As we wrap up this deep dive, we have to talk about the cultural fallout and misinterpretation of this character. Despite the clarity of the film and book as a scathing social critique, Bateman has become a figure that, for some, fuels antisocial movements and toxic masculinity.
We see this so often with complex, satirical villains like the Joker or the narrator of Fight Club.
Absolutely.
And Mary Herron, the director, has had to constantly defend the film's intent. That it is a clear critique, not an endorsement of the behaviors. She noted that these films, which put audiences in the uncomfortable position of identifying with a violent psychopath to see the flaws of his world, naturally stir controversy because people miss the satire.
The most troubling anecdote comes from Christian Bale, who played Bateman with such chilling precision.
Yeah, I've heard this one.
When preparing for the role, Bale spent time on Wall Street and met real traders.
Man.
He told GQ about having conversations with them, and when he arrived, they said they love Patrick Bateman. Bale's immediate natural response was, "Yeah, ironically right." And they had to clarify, saying, "What do you mean by ironically?"
And that misunderstanding, mistaking a stark warning for an aspirational lifestyle, proves the larger societal problem beneath the surface that the film was critiquing. Bateman was never meant to be sympathetic or cool. The fact that people in positions of actual power could sympathize with or even love him suggests that the toxic, ruthless environment the story depicted is very real and often rewarded even today.
It's a profound irony that the critique of toxic masculinity and corporate avarice can inadvertently reinforce those very same elements in a society that lacks the capacity for self-reflection.
Well, the controversy and the film's iconic status are well-deserved precisely because they tap so deeply into human nature and society's flaws. Bateman became a meme not because he's a good person, but because his performance of aggressive, successful masculinity rings unsettlingly true to many.
Before we leave the canonical text, we have to briefly address the ruin of canon, which is the straight-to-video sequel American Psycho 2.
A brief, painful divergence, yes. This 2002 sequel, starring Mila Kunis, was a blatant cash grab that the author, Bret Easton Ellis, completely disowned.
And it fundamentally misunderstood the thematic core of the original work to an embarrassing degree. How exactly did it miss the mark so badly, given the complexity we've just discussed?
It destroyed the original film's ambiguity. It just robbed it of its critical power. In a flashback scene, the sequel confirmed that Bateman was a literal serial killer who killed a babysitter, and the main character, played by Kunis, grew up to be a killer because she witnessed it.
So it made Bateman a basic serial killer.
A basic serial killer whose murders were confirmed reality. That turns a brilliant philosophical satire about societal complicity and identity into simple slasher fare. It completely misses the point that Bateman's kills were inextricably linked to his yuppie, identity-obsessed world, and their unreliability was the key to the social critique.
Indeed. It proved that if you remove the ambiguity, the social critique, and the psychological framework, all you have left is a boring standard villain, which Bateman was emphatically not.
It was a failure of interpretation that proves how essential the ambiguity is to the power of the original story.
So what does this all mean for us, the learner? We've explored the shell of identity, the violence of consumption, and the utter indifference of the system.
Well, if the central thesis of American Psycho is that in a society of total consumption, identity is meaningless, then Bateman's failure to confess is not a personal failure. It's the ultimate success of the system that created him. The system successfully rendered even mass murder irrelevant.
So for you, the learner, consider this final provocative thought. If the system is designed to ignore everything that threatens its surface-level perfection, which is the scarier conclusion, that Patrick Bateman is a literal, blood-soaked psychopath who got away with it, or that society is so entirely self-absorbed that it's literally unable to see him, even when he begs to be seen.
The silence at the end of Bateman's confession is not an empty ambiguity. It is the sound of the system succeeding, leaving him trapped forever in his perfect, meaningless life. And that is the true, enduring horror of American Psycho.